Hello, everyone, and welcome to hockeyprospects.com YouTube channel. And this is Jérôme Bérubé. I'm joined by Brad Allen. And Brad, we are back. It's our first video since, my God, January. So we're back. Nhl Draft is coming really fast in about 10 days, maybe. Yeah, so we're gonna have a lot of video for you guys. And Brad, this is your favorite video of the year. We're gonna talk about all the goalies from our rankings. Let's start. What did you think about this class of goalies this year? Maybe an overall view, I guess, of the goalie class of this year, because we had a few discussion and you were pretty impressed with the depth of this class.
Yeah, it was kind of the opposite of the forward and D group for most of the season there, where there's not as much depth as previous seasons, we feel. But at the goaltending position, it's the opposite of that. There's a lot of depth, and that made the ranking actually a lot more difficult, because if you look at a player, for instance, like Borochev, who we have ranked 1, he's not. There's performances where a player like Samuel Hranek, who I've ranked 8, is right there with him. So it's pancaked, essentially. There's a pancake effect here where there's so many solid goalies who could theoretically actually pull off at least a backup plus career. I've never had a list go this deep where I legitimately think that there's an actual decent chance that a goalie can still make it. Like right up to Carter Casey at 10, even past Carter Casey, Juuso Anais to Vladimir Proskourin. If those goalies develop, they're raw, but if they develop correctly, they can play. So it's a testament, I think, to the goaltending development in general. One thing I've noticed the last 2 years specifically is just how unbelievable the goalies' skating bases are becoming, and how this draft specifically, a couple of notes. One is that the Czechs are coming on strong. We've never seen anything like the amount of Czech goalies that are actually in the NHL playing today, and the amount that are coming up. This goalie class is defined by them. So we're going to be discussing them in depth here the coming hours. And the other factor I will say is that this is probably the most competitive goalie class I've seen. Like, I was looking to drop goalies' ratings when it came to the compete factor, but you right across the board, from Borochev to Trable to Lascelles to Rybkin to Ruzicka to Orshulak to Casey, you name it. All these kids seem to being developed correctly, coming up with the right approach, knowing that you can't give up on plays. That's been one of the defining traits for me in this class specifically. The third thing I'll mention here is that there is no uber prospect like there is in some other classes. No Jesper Wallstedt, Sebastian Cossa, who I still think is going to be an extraordinary goalie in the NHL, just needs a little bit more time. Last year, Pyotr Andrionov, we thought, amazing goalie. Ravensburgen, just such a freak of nature. Askarov, those are the freaks of nature. Nothing like that, but I will say that some of these kids, because of their competitive fire, because of the way that they look on the ice, they might be lagging a little bit behind those kids now, but in the future, they might catch them. They might catch Askarov and Cossa and Wallstedt. So this is a very, very interesting goalie class, and it reminds me a little bit, Jerome, of 2012, when the draft was a bit weaker with the depth, but then the goalies were so good, it kind of bolstered the draft and made up long-term what was going on with it. I won't be shocked at all if that's what happens in this class, because as you know, and some of our listeners who have read our book by now would know that we think that there's a ton of low-floor players in this class that are going to boom or bust. There's going to be some pain on draft day for everybody. So the goalies might be where some teams can make up the difference.
Yeah. Just one thing I forgot before asking you that question. Just our draft book is available, so everyone can get our book on the website at hockeyprospect.com. And also, we appreciate everyone's support who has bought it so far. And in that book, we have a top 15 goalie ranking. You mentioned the Czech. 5 of the 15 are from Czechia, and 4 of the 15 are from Russia. So 9 of 15 are from Czechia and Russia. So that's pretty crazy.
That is crazy. And admittedly, I never got to go back to Martin Solovic. I know for some of you listening, why is he not in the book? Was he not written? I never even got a chance to get back to him. That's how many goalies I had to try to cover. And when you get past 15, 16, 17 goalies, you're watching full games over and over. Just it's not like fours and D. It takes 3 times as long to get each one done. So I just ran out of time, and he's going to get drafted. He's getting drafted. So that's 6 right there, you know, and that's not even mentioning Vermarovsky, who also is very likely to get drafted. This is a crazy goalie class for Czechs. It's unbelievable, really.
Okay, so last year we did like the reverse order. This year we're going to do the opposite. We're going to start at the top of our rankings and go from 1 to 3 until we're tired of talking. Well, until Brad is tired of talking.
We're not going to get tired. We haven't done it.
Listening.
People thought we were missing. People didn't think we're coming back. We got to show everybody we're still here.
All right, let's start with number 1, Brad. You mentioned Dmitry Boruchev out of Russia. So the floor is yours.
So Boruchev, local Yaroslavl's secondary team, the 76. That means they played in the silver division, and that means my job's hard. And then he ended up getting injured, and that makes my job really hard on top of the silver division factor. So the reason that the silver division matters here is it is a weaker – the MHL is not like the WHL, OHL, QMJHL, etc. There was a large discrepancy in talent in terms of team composition, team structure, team funding, you name it. There's a massive disparity. The silver division is not the gold division. The gold division is where you get the top teams, usually top prospects, top systems, top development, top everything. So from a goaltending perspective, we have to look at this and say, okay, he's not facing the same qualities of competition as, say, Carter Casey in the WHL Medicine had. So we have to take that into consideration. Now, that said, scouting is still all about just watching the player. And when you look at Boruchev, you're looking at a 6'2.5" hyper athlete who has a very well-rounded skill set. He is actually, and admittedly, raw relative to what we normally have in the 1 seed. And there's a lot of debate between Jérôme and myself. And like, admittedly, you can go back and forth all day. Trable is admittedly actually ahead of him right now. The bet is that in 4 to 5 years, Boruchev catches up and surpasses him to me, and that's only by a slight variation. These are the only 2 prospects we have that are A-rated this year, just like last year with Andronov and Ravensburgen. We have 2 this year, and that's Boruchev and Trable. So that tells you how close they are, and you could really make arguments back and forth all day, just like we did last year, Jérôme with Ravensburgen and Andronov. Now, some of the separating factors for Boruchev is that he is the most reflexive goalie in this draft. He's a hyper-reflexive goalie. His kicking reflexes are above Trable's. His ability to adaptively cover space, coming out of different save sequences, is elite. And that really separates him, because what it means is when he misinterprets initial plays, he can recover at a rate that's very, very rare. For let's assume he gets to 6'3" when all is said and done. The other factors that he brings together one of the most unique mental foundations I've seen to the position in some time. So let me explain. So when you look at Carter Casey and Vladimir Proskurin in this class, they stay over-amplified too often, and that creates too much reactivity, and that means that they inadvertently have their own athleticism used against them. Boruchev is amplified, but he's not amplified to the point where that occurs. So he stays very intense and locked into games, but then his amplification allows him to make those incredible recovery saves. And even when he misreads an initial play, say he misreads a lateral weak side backdoor option, he can still get back out in front of it because of his reflexes and his willingness to engage. But like Trable, he has this ability to stay poised and contained within himself. And part of that has to do with his depth management and his skating base, and just recognizing how to stay centered in his net at the right time. So with Boruchev, he really does bring together this very unique component where it's very, very hard for goalies, especially when they're younger at this stage in their development, to be able to stay calculated, controlled, but then at the same time amplify at the right times. And I feel like that's one of the primary factors that separates him from Trable, because with Trable's game, he's poised and controlled, but sometimes it's to a fault, which we've talked about all season, Jérôme, where there's certain plays where he's just lagging behind and it doesn't come back ahead of the play, specifically around the back of the net. when he's operating in his windows and he's trying to transfer his RVH and go laterally post to post, he's looking low to high options. That's where Trable can get himself in trouble with making sure that he stays matching the urgency of the play. Where with Borochev, we don't have that concern. So there's some give and take because admittedly, Borochev is more raw. So what that means is from a technical perspective, his butterfly isn't as good as Trable's. The stage Trable keeps a beautiful sealed wide butterfly where Trable can be prone to collapsing in at unique angles and over rotating within it, staying a bit too narrow once he collapses, even though his stance is considerably wider than Trable's, which is kind of weird. The other factor is that when he's in an RVH position, he has a difficulty with which he shares with several other goalies in this class, actually, Tobias Tversnik, Igor Rybkin also falls in this, where they will stay seated in their overlap positions along the post without coming back into their post, integrating correctly, and having an anchor point so they can't use recovery pushes correctly. So those are some of the technical drawbacks. And when you look at them, there is a rawness. But for us, like the biggest factor we weigh is the mental makeup, the base instincts, the reflexes, and the competitive nature of him, and he has all of those things in spades. So the bet is if you bring him over to the OHL or the WHL, you modify some of his technique, and then he's catching up to Trable really quick.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect him to stay in Russia for a bit, right? It's like
he will stay in Russia. I'm just saying theoretically, if you took him out of Russia and you modify it, he'll look more like the NHL prototype, which Trable currently looks like. Yeah. One thing we should mention, Jerome, is like you look at this draft. There's certain goalies in any class, we like Andrianov, Ravensburg, Kosa, Wallstedt, Askarov, etc., where when you look at them, they just look like NHL goalies. They're just staring like, "What? This has to be an NHL goalie." In this class, I would argue that the three that really stand out from that perspective are Borochev, Trable, and Lysell. When they're up to their ability, you're just looking at them like, how does this not end up playing? I would bring in Rybkin and Ruzicka to that, but they're so big. The physical projection and how you project them out has to be a bit different. And so I try to factor that in when saying something like that. But yeah, no, those three specifically look the part for sure.
Okay, let's move on to number 2. You mentioned him in your when talking about Borochev, Tobias Treshball from Czechia, but playing the USHL this past season, is our number 2 ranked goalie. It was a pretty close battle, I think. You and I went back and forth on
neck and neck all day.
So tell me about Treshball.
Sure. So as we mentioned just then, like one of the biggest discrepancies between the two is that when you look at Trable, he is technically more refined than Borochev at this time. And that makes it so easy to say, well, if he's already ahead now, why not just be safer with it and just project him out? And I wouldn't be shocked if an NHL team does that. And maybe I owe you a poutine down the road, Jerome, if Borochev doesn't catch back up. But it's one of those situations where the bread and butter skill set of Borochev is the reflexive athletic base. The bread and butter of Trable, the skating. Oh my goodness, he is the best skater in this class, period. And that's the differentiating quality. And admittedly, when you look at the modern game, one thing we noticed in the playoffs, so many indirect shots. And the reason there's so many indirect shots is because it forces goalies into counter rotations. Guess what you need to rely on when you got to counter rotate? Your edge work. It's all about your edge work, your sheet cut ability. It's all about being able to recover correctly. That is something that Trable, when you project him out, is going to be very gifted at doing. So, and better rate than Borochev. So it's one of those situations where you look at the modern game and you're like, okay, Trable's like a prototype for this, and he's built to do it. The other factors with Trable is that he is, as we mentioned a little bit, extremely composed, poised, cool, very rarely takes himself out of plays. He does have tracking errors that are a bit suspicious sometimes. I remember early when we talked about in November, Jerome, we did a podcast on, we talked about it then, where he can have difficulty sometimes with just basic mid-range traffic. Where you're like, oh, this just shouldn't be a goal, and it is. So there's a little bit of that in him, almost like a Brady Nolan, where there's a bit of a mental glitch in his evaluations at times. But I would argue, like, as he adapted to North America and got more comfortable in the USHL, that didn't happen as often. And one of the defining features of him is that he's 6'4", so he's not the same size as Ruzicka or Rybkin, but he looks it when he is collapsing through his butterfly. His butterfly transfers are unbelievably good. when he collapses, he's extremely wide. Right, that's the differentiating quality. What's strange is that he stays very narrow, so it gives him the access to the edges when he needs to load laterally to push. But then he can just collapse, and his butterfly takes up so much room, and he's insanely good at maintaining seals. Like there are no holes in him. He does not leak things when through his butterfly. So the foundation of him is there. The blocker isn't at the same rate as Borchev. Borchev has more dexterity in his blocker. Admittedly, though, kind of strange. With Borchev, the most goals he let in, the highest rate of susceptibility was actually his low to mid-range blocker, even though he has a very good blocker. And I really tried to dive into that, and I was like, what is going on? And it's because of his downward tracking. It seems to like his processing rates die a little bit when he has to tilt his head in a specific angle. And I was like, I wonder if that's true with Trable with anything. And you know what I found? I found high glove. High glove, he has a couple of issues as well. So there's a little bit of back and forth there. Where Trable, high glove, the processing rates can go down a little bit. Borchev, low blocker, same thing. But their hands are very good. Trable's kicking reflexes are not as good as Borchev's, but they're still very good. And the huge thing here is just how incredible he is at adaptively creating coverage in dynamic and tight save situations. So for instance, say a player is down low and he's pulling the puck from his forehand to his backhand rapidly, trying to elevate it over him. And then it gets knocked. He's in a paddle down position. He has to laterally transfer. He has to bring his glove up. He'll simultaneously be able to get his glove up while doing a split, while staying balanced, while still transferring. And you're like, how in the world is he staying sealed? And he is. And that's because he's a really gifted goalie who can basically get to anything. And that's another defining trait of some of these top kids we're talking about is they can get to most pucks, right? That's another huge thing that you're looking for really at the top of the draft. And that's something that they both have in spades. In terms of drawbacks, his overlap positioning needs a ton of refinement. He can be susceptible to overextending his overlaps in a standing position, seated position, giving up way too much far side room. And the other factor would be when he's in his butterfly. We mentioned how good his butterfly can look. He sits in it too long. He thinks he looks pretty, and he's got to come back out of it. His transitional butterfly is actually a little bit behind because he stays seated, and that makes him susceptible because then he's not using that beautiful skating base he has. So that said, we've seen that time and time again at this age of development where goalies have to modify their overlaps. They got to make sure that they come out of their butterflies quicker so they have access to their skating. He has both of those things down the road, we think. We think those technical modifications will come out of his game. So those are the two most likely goalies that we really, it's as long as development goes smoothly, it'd be very difficult to see how they don't play in some capacity. And most likely starters.
Yeah, so those were two A-rated goalie. We have only two this year. Well, I mean, only two. I don't remember exactly last year. I think
two last year, two this year, two with Kosa Wallstedt draft. We had two.
Okay.
So it's not especially now, Jerome. It's a good point. Like I think teams are starting to recognize the importance of actually jumping on goalies a bit sooner, and creating that chain reaction. Like you want to take the one you really believe in, and if you want to get ahead of it at times too. And we saw it last year.
Yeah, Columbus. Yeah,
Columbus is like, we don't care. We're taking him right now. I know for a lot of people that watched that draft, there was a lot of backlash with that pick, but to take it from us, that was a great pick. Like Andrionov was like literally a 1A, 1B situation with Ravensburgen. We had him A-rated, which means he was in that spot to us. And when a team needs a goalie, you don't want to have to wait for some team to make your decision for you. Like go get the guy you want. And that's what they did. And that might happen this season. I won't be shocked at all if Trable and Borchev both end up in a similar spot to Ravensburg and Andrionov from last season.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start with our B-rated goalie. We have 4 this year, and we're going to start in Latvia with Patrick Plumins, who will likely be the highest drafted goalie out of Latvia, playing in Latvia probably ever in the NHL.
Yeah.
So he's an really interesting goalie who came up pretty big for Latvia at the U18. So Brad, tell our viewers about Patrick Plumins.
So Plumins was a very unique case study for me because he's the first goalie I had to scout out of the Latvian Pro League that I actually really thought highly of initially since Artur Silovs. And Art Silos was taken the 5th round by Vancouver many moons ago. And we had him just outside of our top 5 ranking, which meant we didn't think he'd play long term. We'll see. We'll see if he can hold down in Pittsburgh. I'm still suspicious about it. But I bring up Silos for several reasons. One is that it made my job almost impossible. And the reason that is because Latvia Pro League, as you know, Jerome, not the best Euro League by any stretch of the imagination. It's not the SHL, it's not the KHL, it's not Extraliga. We're dealing with low event hockey, and we're dealing with way more low danger shots. And that makes my job really, really hard. So one of the main things that I have to do to compensate is I'm not really watching the shot selection or shot volume or nearly as much as you would think with other goalies. I'm watching everything off the puck. How's he just reading setups? How's he reading? Because the rate of execution isn't there, but the structure is okay. So you're looking at plays that make sense. You're looking at 3-on-2 rush option plays. You're looking at 2-on-1 plays. You're looking at backdoor reads. You're looking at weak side lateral reads, but the execution rates aren't there. So the puck usually doesn't get to the spot you're hoping for, but that doesn't mean I can't watch Patrick Plumans do his thing. That doesn't mean I can't see how he's evaluating and how he's reading it. And that is where things got very tricky because I realized pretty quickly that he's very, very smart. And so I was really hoping that he would get international exposure. And then thank God the U18 showed up from that perspective, because without that, I will admit, there's no chance I could have had him this high. I really needed the U18s to solidify and validate what I thought I had previously seen. So the base of this goalie is actually pretty similar to Jesper Wallstedt. Now, I'm not saying they're the same goalie. I'm not saying they're the same trajectory, but they're blocking style goalies who aren't the highest end athletes, especially in their initial draft seasons. They're projecting out with their growth rate, with their athletic base, but they're very, very, very smart. And not just within their reads. It's one thing to be able to mentally map the ice, scan the ice, recognize, anticipate play in advance. It's another thing entirely to do that and be able to track correctly as well. That's where somebody like Hrenik, who we'll get to, he can read, but the tracking's a bit down, right? These goalies like Plumans and Wallstedt, they have both. That's what makes them more projectable. The reason that it really matters for them is we have to weigh the mental foundation of them, like Plumans Wallstedt, much higher because the athletic base isn't there for the recovery sequences. So if they're not making the initial read correctly, then their game is in trouble. But as you saw at the U18 Jerome, and I've seen in Latvia in the few high danger sequences I get per game, is that he is so good at reading release points. That means that he can contain rebounds at a much higher rate. It means that he's very rarely out of position on the initial save. It means that his interpretations were being able to load correctly are there. So it gives him the advantages which allow him to compensate for the lack of the athletic traits that Trabel and Borchev present. Now, this is where it gets a bit scary because I have to assume, welcome to scouting, that in 4 to 5 years, he will get the functional athletic base necessary to at least hold much in the same way Wallstedt has. And Wallstedt, it wasn't as cut and dry as it is now. People forget the AHL season, he was blown to smithereens there just 2 years ago, right? So this blocking style goalies, cerebral blocking style goalies, I don't think will be in the NHL as much as we have seen currently. There's still a lot of them that are still viable in the NHL today, but the direction of the sport, the amount of skating, the amount of recovery rate that's necessary, the external hip rotation extension rates necessary, the rate of recovery is just ridiculous. So it takes a special blocking style goalie to be ranked this high, but he's pretty special. He really reads the game at that level. He presents extremely well. He has technique is good. He's 6'3", incredibly calm, cool, collected, and poised. Honestly, it reminds a little bit of Connor Hellebuck in that regard. He's just on top of pucks. He's always in control. And I'll send one thing technically I'll mention that he separates himself when it comes to even the top guys, even ahead of Trabel and Borchev, is how he understands how to operate with low to high plays of development below his goal line. He's very good at reverse tracking behind his net, evaluating the highest danger area. You know how Kuznetsov and Datsyuk do their reverse hook passes below the goal line and maintain strong side. A lot of goalies this stage, they're going to go to the opposite side of the net, pucks in the back of the net. They don't know what happened. Plumans is very good at staying on top of shot selections like that. And that's super, super rare. And it's honestly insanely impressive because he's in the Latvian Pro League having to learn this. Like that really makes it honestly that much more remarkable. So when I look at him versus Silovs was a better athlete, but Silovs was way worse in terms of rates of consistency on low to mid danger shots. And Plumans is ahead of him in terms of consistency and just being able to stay on top of pucks. So that's why I'm as high on Plumans as I am.
All right. So a really interesting story to follow how high he's gonna go in the draft. It's pretty cool story. Goalie playing in Latvia, because remember, like before what happened with Russia and Ukraine, the Latvian prospect, they had a team in the MHL, so that's where Silov played in his draft.
That's right, Doug Moriga. Yeah, still remember.
So it's a bit different now. A lot of the Latvian are actually in North America, whether it's the CHL or the USHL. But it's his goalie, stayed on, play professionally in the Latvian league. So really interesting to see where he goes in the draft. Our fourth ranked goalie is our biggest goalie on the list. Actually, we have 2 6'7" goalie.
Monoliths, Jerome. We got two monoliths in the net.
Yeah. So we'll start with Filip Ruziska from Brandon and the WHL. He is Czech, another Czech goalie. And he's listed as 6'7", 205. I'm gonna be honest, Brad. He looks bigger than.
He looks bigger. He looks even bigger than that, doesn't he? He looks huge in that. Yeah. He looks monstrous in that. Yeah, there is a cutoff point for all of you listening to this. Yes, there is a cutoff point, and yes, he's right at the brink of that cutoff point. There is a point of no return. Like there's a reason we haven't seen any Akibono sumo style wrestlers just planted in the crease yet. There's a point of no return with this stuff. Admittedly, you never say this and that, but it's true. You hope he stops growing. You hope he stops growing. You don't want 6'7", we're good. Ben Bishop, 6'7", 6'8", we still haven't seen it. Honestly, we had Ivan Fedotov he's a perfect example of what happens when you just get too big for the position. And I bring him up because I actually used him as a base because I knew his game well over in the KHL. I tracked him for years, trying to figure out and project what he could be in the NHL. And sure enough, the two critical issues with Fedotov's game were his tracking through coverage, never let up, always still to this day, one of his biggest issues. So I made sure Ruzicka, I weigh that real heavily. And the other is his ability to understand the end phase of handling plays in tight to the net. Because with Fedotov, what would happen is you get a Matt Duchene in tight on him. Matt Duchene would eat him alive to turn him into a pretzel. What's he going to do on his radar cover? He's a monster. He can't move. So he just get caught. He get caught in between save types, right? So with Ruzicka, I had to make sure that he understood open to neutral to closed blade positions when it came to handling and shooting positions on in tight to him and the tracking. And what I found over the course of the season was extremely surprising. He's very good at both. He's a very good puck tracker through coverage at this stage. He fights with every ounce of his being to see pucks. It doesn't hurt, too, that when he's in a relaxed stance, he can literally just see into the rafters. So he can see the puck, no problem from that perspective. And then when he's in tight, his adaptive coverages, his save selection, his reactivity, his intuition, much, much better than I expected. Because usually, Jerome, is what happens is you get these giant goalies when the puck's in tight, they just collapse into their butterfly. It's like, well, I'm huge, please hit me. And in this case, Ruzicka, he thinks the game like he's almost 6'3", but I mean that as a compliment because he knows he needs to still move and select coverages correctly. I mentioned this in the quote in the book. I'll mention it here. He reminds me of William Wallace off the ice. Like, this is a kid who, don't be surprised he got blue paint under his mask because this kid is unbelievably competitive. What a battler in the net. And it really helped him this season because, as Jerome mentioned, he's enormous. He's 17 years of age. He has another 30 pounds to fill out his frame. There is still a bit of coordination jank that will, I assume, come out of his game. We're assuming it's going to get corrected here in the coming years as he continues to develop. But it put him in a massive disadvantage. But he made up for it because he's so darn competitive. He never takes his foot off the gas. He's just always trying to make saves regardless of what's happening around him. So that really stood out to me. The other factor with him specifically is that his growth curve was ridiculous. I had no time for this goalie at the start of the year. I was like, he's too big. When he's swimming, he's done. Now, Millie, early portion of the season, Jerome and me, what we're doing right through every prospect, not just goalies, we're just trying to get a general list made, trying to evaluate what we need to get back to, so when we do deep dives, we can get it done correctly. Now, with Ruzicka, the initial impression wasn't great, but I knew I had to go back. In February, I go back and I couldn't believe the growth rate. From November to February, it was night and day, and that's not unexpected. He's enormous. Of course, there's going to be some natural progression from a physical perspective, and what that meant was way better butterfly mechanics that just came together, way better at starting to seal. His transitional butterfly for his size is actually pretty impressive. He has very good access to his inside edge work, and that was another defining trait of this goalie, because the bigger the goalie, you got to weigh their skating very heavily as well, because again, we talked about rate of recovery. They're just not going to have the same rate of recovery as a smaller goalie, and they're not going to have the external hip rotation, the counter rotations of a smaller goalie. So when they get those indirect plays, they are at a disadvantage. So the skating really mattered, but he's very good at accessing his side edge work. He's very good at actually maintaining himself when he is laterally transferring, needs to hold. His weight shifts are surprising. Like, that was one thing, Toronto, when you watch, I was pretty surprised by his weight transfers. Like, he is pretty good at maintaining himself in the net when he needs to. Though admittedly, sometimes he'll swim too when he's getting super combative and trying to get too involved. The other factor with him, uniquely coordinated upper frame. His upper half is actually more coordinated than his bottom half. His reflexes are good, and his kicking reflexes, kicking ability, and extensions will hold, but they're not like defining characteristics of his game. The blocker and glove are way ahead of schedule. I'm very surprised how nimble, dexterous his blocker and glove are, and how he's seamlessly able to use his limbs to contort himself in hard and difficult angles, and how good he is at maintaining skills in specific types of saves. So the other thing I'll say is I really thought he was better down the stretch. His playoff performances were ridiculous. Like one or two of them to me blew me out of the water. I couldn't believe how good he was. I think it was against Calgary. He was unbelievable in some of those games. And with enormous goalies, you want them controlled, poised. You want the tracking to be there. You want the reads to be there. You want the anticipation to be correct, the loading to be correct, the curve to be in the right direction. And guess what? He had it all. And he's an unbelievable competitor. So did not expect him to be in our top five at the end of the season. Let me tell you, first impression, did not think we would be talking about this kid, but that's the beauty of scouting. You just never know. You got to keep going, keep watching.
Yeah. Okay. Our fifth ranked goalie. So we're going to go from the biggest one on our list to the smallest one.
Smallest is right. It's right.
William Lassell from the Q, who split the year between Rimouski and Blainville-Boisbriand. So with any smaller goalie, there's a bit of the margin of error is not really it's not really there for them. So they have to be really, really, really good. So what do we think about William Lassell, Brad? We have a lot of discussion about him in the second half of the season, and trying to rank him, which was a bit difficult. But he's our fifth ranked goalie. So what's your view on Lassell?
Well, you want to bring up his background, Jerome, first. He's a pretty unique background with the situation. I want to touch on that because it's interesting how it actually affects his game too, in a positive way, mostly.
Yeah, so I don't remember exactly the percentage, but I know he's pretty much deaf from one ear, and I think 50% deaf on the other ear. So that, like, I've never heard that before with any goalies. But he sees it as his superpower. So I guess he can probably be more focused, doesn't hear maybe obviously the trash talk or the crowd noise. So maybe he can really be in his own zone, basically, trying to stop pucks. So that's a really interesting background story about him. And so for the rest, Brad, I'll let you talk about his game here.
To expand on that point, it's very interesting how he engages with his own defense. Like, he has to give different signals. He has to deal with them in a different way, and you can see how he operates on the ice. It's a little bit different because of it. The other factor, Jerome, I think he had 7 shutouts this season. So when he's dialed in, you can't really affect him, right? As you mentioned, you can't talk mad smack. You give him some gestures, I guess. You can't talk smack. And I guess there must be a filtering system there where maybe it allows him to enhance his processing rates for longer, because he can really process the game, and that's why he's up here. The main reason that he is higher than both Casey and Proskurin, who are the other small goalies that we'll be discussing, that matter in this draft class. The reason he's ahead of them is because his ability to dial in and process the play, evaluate the play, anticipate the play, recognize advanced plays, is at a higher level than them. He's not as reactive as them. He doesn't drop prematurely as often as them. And that gives him that sixth sense that a smaller goalie must have in order to translate. The UC Saros effect, where, in his prime, when Saros would measure lateral passes, sometimes he was so far ahead of the play you couldn't believe the shooter even shot. You're like, well, that's 3 minutes too late, my man. That was just the way it was with Saros in his prime. Dustin Wolf, you're seeing that currently. And with Lysell, there's some of that. Now, I will admit this, though. With Saros, I thought it was a slam dunk the second I saw him. With Dustin Wolf, I really thought extraordinarily high of him even before I saw him in his drafts. At 16, I was telling Mark and our staff, there's this prodigy who's tiny, and I don't know if it's going to matter type of thing. With Lysell, I had to slow cook him, Jerome. I couldn't get there when I first saw him. I didn't love his performance. He was inconsistent, tracking errors. As you said, they have to be special. You can't play at 6 feet, sub 6 feet, unless you're special. And so it took me time, but I did what I had to do with Ruzicka. Went back, was fascinated by the kid's story, wanted to make sure, wanted to see, and he destroyed my previous interpretation of him. He had some incredible performances. And one thing from a scouting perspective in general, but applies to goalies as well, is you have to try to weigh the season, the totality of the season, but then you also have to reflect on the peak performances and what they mean to the evaluation. And that's where Lysell can separate himself. When he's peaking, when he's on his game, he absolutely, unquestionably looks like an NHL starter. It's just the rate of consistency, which I know, Jerome, you've mentioned that you're agreeing with me on that. That's one of the areas of his game where he needs to fundamentally continue to adapt and develop if he's going to play in the NHL one day. But one thing with this goalie specifically, he's too good for the league. Like, he's too good for the queue. When he was playing well, it was just like, oh, this game's over and he's just going to get to everything. But we should probably mention his athletic traits since he's 6 feet. He is not as athletically gifted as, I would say, Saros at the same age in most areas. And I probably slightly under Wolf in most areas as well, but I would say he's ahead of Devin Levi at the same stage. And he's reflexive as Alex Gorgiev. And I know now Gorgiev has fizzled out, but back when Gorgiev was 18, 19, like, the reflexes are unbelievable in Gorgiev. So he is a hyper-reflexive goalie, incredible, and I mean incredible glove hand. Probably the best glove hand in this draft. Like, some of the glove saves he makes are just absolutely ridiculous. Edge work is phenomenal. Ability to maintain balance coming out of his weight transfers is extremely impressive, as it should be for a 6-foot goalie. This is not a 6'8" monolith like Ruzicka, so he's better be ahead in those areas. Extremely, extremely confident. I'd argue Jerome probably the most confident goalie in this class. He's got swagger, and moxie. He's got all of it. He needs it. You got to have some of that for the position. So that's important to him. The biggest limiting factors are still the tracking through coverage. Tracking through coverage specifically is what he must continue to improve if he's going to turn in what we think he can be. That said, I have a lot of faith in him because some of his most dynamic saves of sequence were a result of him tracking correctly through coverage and still getting out front. It's just sometimes he lets the foot off the gas for a minute or two, and mid-danger shot that shouldn't go in gets past him because of the inability to track correctly through a lot of bodies in front of him. So besides that, he might not be a starter. He might not be, but I would be shocked if he's not at least splitting in the net. And the reason I say that is because this season, you're going to have to help me here, Jerome. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but Buffalo Sabres backup, who was a St. Louis Blues draft pick, they took him up off waivers there. Had some AHL seasons that were really impressive.
Yeah, he's got 20 games. He was in the queue.
He did play in the queue. I can't remember off the top of my head his name right now. Colton Ellis, thank you. Colton Ellis, I was like, okay, similarly sized. And Ellis has improved dramatically past where I thought I did not have time for Ellis in this draft season. I thought he was too mechanically rigid. Didn't think he was a good enough athlete relative to his size, even though he's pretty smart. So I watched Ellis play versus LaSalle. It was not close. LaSalle destroyed Ellis at the same age, destroyed him. So if that's the case, and Ellis is already this close to making it as a backup, I can't imagine if things don't go right. I can't imagine where LaSalle's at least a split starter, and he's our fifth ranked goalie here. So it tells you the depth. Like he still very much has potential to be a starter. And we're talking about the fifth ranked goalie now. In typical drafts, you're talking about the 4 to 5 goalies being the only ones that make it. In most cases, after that, you're basically doing it just so everybody else knows what you've seen, and maybe obviously it's goaltending. I definitely have some things wrong here, and I'm sure that 1 or 2 kids here in the back half who are going to do a lot better than I think and end up making it. So it's important for me to be able to evaluate that. But the first 4 to 5 really matter. And he's right there in the 5th slot, and we're still talking starter potential. That tells you the depth.
Yeah, I mean, like a number 1 starter, like that plays 60+ games. Like they exist still, but
they're not very often. Not unless you're Hellebuyck or Vasilevsky or something. You're not going to see that very much.
There's a lot of a 1A, 1B, tandem now, and I think LaSalle has a better chance of being that than a true number 1 that plays 55, 60 games. I feel like there's going to be a lot, less and less of those 60+ game, guys in the NHL. So, all right, let's move on to number 6, and we go back to Russia and our second 6'7" goalie, Yegor Rybkin. Brad, he's not a guy who played a lot this year. So again,
very little in the last couple of years,
So tell our viewers about Yegor Rybkin.
Yeah, so Rybkin is out of a Chaika system in the MHL. He is the freak of freaks. So Ruzicka, listen, he's a monolith, but you see the athletic traits. We've seen those time and time again. It's the mental traits that separate Ruzicka. The intelligence, the competitive. That's really rare within the goalie that big. With this kid, Rybkin, you're looking at more Damien Clara style of player. And what I mean by that is that he's a freak athlete, like 6'7" and a true freak of nature. And the best way I can ever describe that to all of you listening is that on lateral transfers, when he needs to enter a full split and maintain balance with his hand positioning being correct, he can do it. At 17, at 6'7". That's preposterous. Brady Nolan can't do it. Vigo Tam can't do it. Sebastian Charvet can't do it. Ruzicka can't do it. So Trable can't even do it as well as him. He's 6'7", 17. So completely bizarre when it comes to some of his athletic traits, like just ridiculous athlete, which there's always, the saying was there's in Russia, there's always someone stronger than you. Well, there's freak athletes too. Like some of these kids coming out of Russia are unbelievable. Now, where his evaluation really, really differs from Ruzicka, and you touched on it, the amount of games we're dealing with. Oh man, am I ever limited? So he hit. What was his last viewing? I believe was November 17th. I think. Okay, so it's pain, man. It's hard. Like I got Latvian Pro League with Plummins. I got this kid playing like 8 games from November 17th. I got to deal with the monolith and Ruzicka and try to figure out his growth rate. I got to figure out the silver division relative to the USHL. Welcome to goaltending scout. And yeah, it's easy. All right. So this is the thing. I'm basically banking this on what I saw from him last season towards the end, and then seeing his growth rate in the summer to this season, then trying to project that to be if there's another gear to what he showed over those 5 months of development. Can he have the same 5 months he had in the summer again when we see him down the road, right? So if he can, that means you're dealing with one of the freakiest type of athletes imaginable. And it's interesting because usually with hyper athletes who are huge, you get a goalie who's going to take himself out of position a lot. You're going to get a goalie who's not really thinking the game in the way you need to see. But guess what? He's the opposite. He's actually contained in his net. He has good crease containment. He does not have a lot of lateral overflow. He's very calm. He's calculated. He's poised. There's a maturity to him that is very unique, very rare for a goalie with his traits. Admittedly, there's sometimes where I almost wish he would ramp it up a little more. It's like, you're a freak. Go be a freak. Go do it. And instead, he's very technical. And that's the opposite of Boruchev, for instance. Boruchev, one of the biggest differences between Russian goaltending systems, Russian development, relative to North American development and other Euro leagues, is that they let the goalie be themselves, meaning they don't force technique on them too early. And that means they allow the base instincts to evolve and allow the goalie to take off long-term when they do incorporate technique down the road, right? This was an issue, Jerome, we both had with the London kid last year that Vancouver took in the second round.
Yeah.
So it's one of those situations where you want to see the instincts, but you also want to see the technique. This kid brings both of those things. He actually is technically pretty advanced, and he has some very good base instincts, and he's enormous. He's a freak. Now, are there drawbacks? Absolutely. Bring this back to Ruzicka too. The nature of what we're seeing in the playoffs. You're trying to get goalies to externally rotate, and that forces them to counter rotate, and that means a ridiculous amount of torque on their hip line. What does that mean? It means long-term, they are more susceptible to injury. Jakob Markstroms are rare. Jakob Markstrom was a freak of nature, very rare for a goalie to be able to hold that long, have that type of career without more major injuries. Ben Bishop, think more of that line where you get 4 to 5 peak years, then their careers usually die off because of the injury risk. That is one of the primary factors why Ruzicka and Rybkin are slightly lower, despite being enormous and having a tremendous amount of talent. So that's something you have to take into consideration. The other factor I'll say is that I mentioned Ruzicka is a pretty decent skater relative to his size. Rybkin's better. Rybkin is an even better skater. Rybkin has some tremendous skating ability. Micro adjustment rates are slightly better. Micro shuffle rates are slightly better. His backward drifting is slightly better. There's certain aspects of his efficiency that are ahead in Ruzicka, but Ruzicka, much, much, much larger sample, which makes me more comfortable, and the battle level. The battle of Ruzicka, and I always take getting the opportunity to see how smart a goalie is in the WHL relative to a backup in the MHL all day. I don't care if it's the Gold League, the Silver Division. I don't care which division they're in. I'll take the WHL sample. That's why we still put Ruzicka at the end. They're slightly ahead, but admittedly, this is like Treybo Borchev. I went back and forth all day. I flipped them 20 times during the season, so it is what it is.
Okay, well, if we move on to number 7, we stay in Russia. We got Dmitry Ivchenko out of Omsk. Scouting goalie out of the Omsk program has been a bit of a challenge in the last few years. So, Brad, tell me about Ivchenko.
Absolutely. So Ivchenko actually falls more into the Treybo category in some ways. So what I mean by that, very prototypical for what we're seeing with the new age development of goaltending. Very good skating foundation, technically advanced, poised, controlled, calculated, calm. He's got all those traits. The problem is Treybo was a starter, and Dmitry Ivchenko, not a starter. That makes our life really difficult because it means that there's only going to be a couple of performances per season where he's playing against top teams like Tulpar, Ska, etc. And it was interesting against Tulpar were some of his better performances, and that's one of the reasons he's up here still. Against Ska, he was eaten alive. He looked very flat that game. So out of that game, what I had to do was say to myself, okay, let's see if he can recalibrate here, and let's see if he can actually come back and showcase that he can be something. And then he had 4 shutouts in his next 7 performances. Now, they're not against good teams, but it's one of those situations where when you watch how he's operating, it's translatable, right? And now, what I mean by that is it's translatable in terms of his T push-offs, in terms of his skating and lateral recovery rates, and in terms of his butterfly mechanics, his glove hand, his blocker, his anticipation, his reads for plays are there. But what it means, I can't read the release points of them because the shot quality is just not nearly the same degree, right? So that's where I'm a bit more uncomfortable. It's one of the reasons I dropped him. Jerome, we had a lot of discussion about this kid. I was very high on him when I first saw him because I saw the skating base and I was like, this is pretty similar to Treybo's, and he's 6'3", and he's got some real talent. I was like, this is a real one right now. But then admittedly, as over the course of the season, I was like, okay, I don't really know how he reads his releases as well as some of these other kids. He's a backup. And admittedly, he left me wanting more when it came to his consistency rates. This is a pretty inconsistent goalie. But he falls into the C+ category, which for our newer listeners, maybe we should just mention this, Jerome. A means first round, B means second, third round. C+ is now the 4th round range. That's the range we're in now. And usually when it comes to the fourth round talent, that's the talent that still has potential to really supersede even some of the A or B kids down the road. When you get to the C range, that's usually where it doesn't happen as often. Now, in the goaltending position, it's actually, you do see some C-rated goalies end up jumping. Joey DeCourt was a 7th rounder. Pekka Rinne was taken like the 19th round. Okay, it happens, but it's not nearly as often. But the reason that I bring that up is because when you get the 4th round with the goalie specifically for me, we're talking dark horses. And that means in a redraft, we might be talking top 5 values still. And that's where Dmitry Evchenko falls into.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, he was our first C+.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go to our second C+. We have 3 C+ that we're going to talk about. Samuel Hrenak, who is a Slovakian goalie who split the past season between playing for the Slovakian U20 team in Slovakia, which is a bit of a same situation as the NTDP. And then he moved to the USHL in the second half of the season. Also played for Slovakia at the U18 in April. So, Brad, what's on your mind about Samuel Hrenak?
That he's awesome, and I might have put him too low. That's my first instinct. I love this goalie. I had him top 5 for a lot of the year. Played a very similar situation to Michael Prodl, meaning that he ended up in the Slovakia 2 Hockey League playing on the U18 team, and that meant he was dealing with 60, 70 shots per game. And he was just his team was getting beaten up, and they just, it's a development situation for them. And that means that kid, he either is dialed in and keeping them in games, or they're just outright getting blown away, right? And that's very good in some ways for me, though, because think about it from this perspective, Jerome. If I took Evchenko and Rybkin and I compared him to Hrenak, I have more high danger shot selection for Hrenak in 5 games than I do of Evchenko and Rybkin seasons combined. That gives me a whole lot of intel. That helps my cause. One of the worst things that can happen is when you have a goalie that's on an elite team, and because you're just never going to see the same rates of high danger sequences against them. For us, Spencer Knight was the best example of this ever, where it's like, okay, he's a phenomenal talent, but guess what? 7 minutes without a shot. And then he's letting in a low percentage goal, and you're asking yourself, well, is this because he has a processing issue? Is it because he can't stay dialed into a game? Or is it just because the team is up 7-0 halfway through the second period? He no longer has to care, right? And now with Hrenak, I don't have to ask any of those questions. So instead, I get to see how combative he is, which he was extremely competitive, and he had to be to stay in games, much like Prodl did in Slovakia too. With Hrenak, when I'm watching Slovakia too, the competitive nature of him is very similar to Prodl's. And that can be seen because when he's letting in 6 goals, I still want to see if he can make the read, the right play, and really match the Ursa play and get back out in front of it for the potential 7th goal. You really want to see if a goalie has the foundation to be able to hold even when they're basically under siege and the shots are just coming in waves. Now, what was interesting to me is I got to see him in the USHL and I got to see him internationally. And that gives us an advantage, Jerome, because with Rybkin, I'm looking at him in just one team. If I get 3-4 teams, that gives me a much better foundation for what I'm actually dealing with. What I found was that Hrenak was incredible internationally, actually before the U18s in some of his viewings. And that was one of the reasons I had him a bit higher, because he showed these natural reflexes, just the intelligence, the wherewithal, the ability to stay consistent. And that was one of the defining characteristics of the goalie, stay consistent. And that got me the USHL, where he had some very good performances, but it made me slightly hesitant because I realized that his athletic rates were not developing at the same rate as some of these other kids above him. So he is mechanically slightly more rigid than some of the players in the top 7. Doesn't have the same extension rates, doesn't have the same athletic ability in most areas, but he's still a good athlete. And he's the first goalie I would mention that I feel like he's more than some of his parts. That's one of the defining qualities of this kid is, okay, you look at him, is he specialized anywhere? No, he's not like Evchenko with the skating base or Trable with the skating or the size of Rybkin or the intelligence of Plumans, but he's extremely, extremely good basically at everything. And for some reason, when I watch him, I feel like there's an effect there that's more pronounced than it even should be. I don't know how else to describe it other than that. This is where things get very subjective. Welcome to scouting. But he's one for me, again, a dark horse where if things go right in his development, especially athletically, if he has one more uptick in his athleticism that's a bit unexpected, he could really take off and then come back in the top 3 to 4 long term, because he's very smart. Doesn't track quite as well as Plumins, but very, very, very smart, very competitive, has a lot of very good foundational qualities to his game.
Okay. Let's go back to a goalie from Czechia at number 9, Michal Orsulak, who played in the WHL for Prince Albert. Had a great playoff run. Prince Albert lost in the final of the WHL final, and he also played for Czechia at the World Junior. So what are we saying about Michal Orsulak, Brad?
I'm eating humble pie. I'm eating the crow pie. Yeah, he was one I missed last season. I'll be honest, I thought Central was, quite frankly, like, I did not agree at all with their assessment of him. They had him very high. I just thought he was way too raw. Like, mechanically, the toolkit, everything was so raw. And then you're watching him out of Czechia U20, and he was just fighting through everything. And it's like, okay, he does have some, like, natural gifts. He's smart. Like, you see that he was pretty intelligent in some areas of the game, and he was big and he was very young. And it's like, okay, there's some projection there that if the growth rate hits, he might be something. But admittedly, I did not expect to actually have to rank him in our top 10 this season. I did not see it coming at all. I remember we both watched him together, U20s. Not very good there. I thought he was kind of mixed. I felt like the pressure hit him. Like, he just felt flat to me. And I was thinking, yeah, we're right. We got this one. We don't have to worry about him. But again, because of what happened with Lascelles, what happened with Rybkin, Ruzicka, where I had to go back to make sure, and they changed my opinion. That's what happened here. Schulich, I went back to him later in the season. I'm glad I did. It's interesting. He can completely dominate games when he's playing up to his potential now. And I did not see that at all in his -1 season. And his athletic rates have improved significantly in most critical areas. And despite how I would characterize him as a blocking style goalie, he still has a pretty decent athletic base. And one of the foundational differences between him, Prenick, and Plumins is that he actually has the deepest hip line. And what that means is that he can really extend out, and that's going to really matter for his game, because sometimes he can lose pucks in coverage and make tracking errors, but then he can elongate himself enough to compensate for that. That said, we call him a blocking style goalie because he is fundamentally someone that likes to play the position further back, almost like Henrik Lundqvist. Just, he likes to play more back on his goal line for most instances until he reads correctly the in tight, a higher percentage options is coming to him. Then that's when he explodes, starts gaining ground, and shows very, very good in tight adaptive coverage. In fact, his in tight adaptive coverage was so good that's really what the defining feature of his game is. And it's one of the main reasons I think he can actually translate as a blocking style goalie. And then one way I tried to make sure that was concrete for me in my assessment was I went and watched a whole lot of his breakaways. He's way better on breakaways than you would expect out of most blocking style goalies. Some goalies that are bigger kids, like he's 6'4", he has a big frame, but there's still some filling out to do. But usually they can get beat up in the shootouts, right? If they make the wrong weight transfer, they're in trouble. And that's one of our Schulich's weaknesses, especially last season with the weight transfers. And this season they've improved, but it's still a bit of an issue. But he is so good at recognizing, handling phases, recognizing windows of operating around him, that he almost never prematurely drops and stays on his skates for those types of plays. And so he's basically the opposite of Robin Lehner is what I'm trying to say. Like, Robin Lehner couldn't win a shootout if his life depended on it. This kid has all the foundation to be able to actually be very good in shootouts, very good around his net area. And surprising, this is one area I just totally got wrong last season. One of the best gloves in the draft. Couldn't believe how good his glove hand was. His glove is just under the cells. And so that was extremely surprising. I did not expect his glove to be that good. So that's the foundation of him. Blocking style goalie with some specialization with the glove, very good at adaptive in tight, high danger scenarios and breakaways. What could make or break him is the weight transfer still. He's still a heavy kid. And he hasn't even filled out that frame, which means we're talking Freddie Anderson type of thickness. Like Freddie Anderson was 40 coming out of SHL. That could be the situation with this kid where he might bump up to 230 pounds and have to really hold on his edges. So it's all about the weight transfers long term. If he can get there, he has the rest. He has good technique break points, meaning that he can break his technique when he needs to, when he misassesses initial play. He'll throw caution in the wind, put anything he can. He doesn't care about making pretty saves. He'll make some ugly saves if he has to do it. And that can be kind of rare in today's game. That's where, I'm more impressed with this draft class relative to some others, is like Spencer Knight. We'll go back to him. Drove me insane with his inability to break his own technique. This goalie is willing to do that. That really matters for him. It's very important for his foundation.
And he's listed at 6'4", 225. So
big boy. And there's room. I'm telling you, I was shocked at how much room there was for him. I thought going in, when I saw him, I was like, oh, he must look like me, just a block of tofu in the crease or something. He doesn't. He doesn't look like that at all. He actually has like a good X-frame on him with room to grow.
All right, let's move on to number 10, Brad, and we're going to stick to the WHL with Carter Casey, who's an American goalie who played in Minnesota this season. Not the best season. He came in with like lots of hype. Had a great run in the USHL in the playoff last year with Waterloo, I believe. But his season was not. It was a bit of a difficult season, and he played on a great team too. So
yeah, absolutely. So with Carter Casey, as you mentioned, a lot of hype. He's playing on Medicine Hat, which a lot of responsibility there. That they had some players come out of the city, like McKenna obviously left, but they still had a lot of natural talent there. So they're expecting to be a pretty darn good team still, and Casey was going to lead the way. So the big thing with this player is the athletic component. Like, this is a freak of nature in net. This is arguably the best athlete in the draft. At the position, there's some arguments to make. The top athletes in this class are Casey, Proskurin, Lascelles, Rybkin, and Borchev. I would say probably that, and Trable just slightly under them, and but a lot of good athletic talent. But Casey is a freak of nature. You're talking hyper reflexive, incredibly explosive, very very explosive goalie. Reminds us a bit of Jonathan Quick, Jerome, with his lateral transfer rates. His open extension splits and everything, very similar to Jonathan Quick. And I'm going to further enhance that because the other goalie I would say is somewhat similar to is Ilya Nabokov at the same age, who also hyper reflexive, super fast, super dynamic, and explosive laterally. But like Quick and like Nabokov, there are two fundamental technical issues that need to be completely overhauled. With Quick, he would, in the modern game, Quick was amazing for his time, but in the modern game, he'd have to continue to refine. I know he just retired, but like, let's say peak Jonathan Quick, he would still have to make himself, I think, slightly bigger than he did in his prime. The game's changed, it's evolved a bit. Casey has the exact same issue. Casey is only 6'2", and he plays like he's Darren Pang. Like, you're talking, he looks like he's 5'6" in the net. You can't believe how short he looks in the net. The reason why is because his set stance is so unbelievably low to the ice, and it makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. The reason you keep a low set stance is if your transitional butterfly rates are poor, or you don't have a good 5-hole technique, so that if you stay lower to the ice, you have give yourself a better chance to be able to drop before a puck can go through you. Carter Casey is hyper reflexive. He has none of these issues. He's just tiny for no. He can load correctly. He's explosive as they come. His skating base is good. I love to hear why his goaltending coach or coaches went with the decision they have to make him as low as he's been, because it's made him remarkably susceptible, much smaller than he needs to be. Ilya Nabokov did not get drafted until his third season and entered the KHL because of his set stance being so small. So it took the KHL to get that technique broken and pull him back out of his set stance so that he could look and present much bigger in the net. Casey will have to follow suit. And the other factor is all mental. So again, this is he's got one of the best blockers in the draft. He's incredible. He's exaggerating his shoulder posture to get the top corners of the net, and he's unbelievably explosive. Very similar to Timofey Vincent in that way, Jerome, I would say. Toronto fifth-round pick a couple of seasons ago, who's a freak of nature himself. And it gives him such a unique profile because he can be in an RVH. He's looking like he's 5'10", but then he's in the top of the net before the puck can get up there. And you're like, oh, man. Like, he can do some very unique things. But what happens in drafts, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, but this goes right into Vladimir Proskura, who we're about to talk about too, which is that when you're such a freak of nature athletically, it can be weaponized against you depending on where you are in terms of your development. Casey is overreactive, and he has a lot of difficulty with getting into a rhythm in his games. I find, one quote I have in the book, Jerome, is about his reset points in net. So for instance, like Brendan Bussey does this a lot. I'm sure a lot of you watch the Cup finals. Brendan Bussey, you'll see how he coming out of saves. Bussey's a bit unorthodox with how he approaches the position. So I think he got on draft in the first place. But one thing that he does is that he resets with his glove and blocker by pressing them in constantly, and sometimes inopportune. He's just resetting when he shouldn't be, right? And Casey is exactly in that situation, and it's to a fault. And what's interesting to me is I found, Jerome, that like you get these kids. He's a younger kid. He's on a medicine hat. He's got a ton of hype coming in because of what he did in the USHL and the playoffs. And I felt like when he started having poor performances, he wouldn't let his foot off the gas. As a goalie, you've got to be able to calm down, try to recenter yourself, try to recalibrate, and just let the game breathe. Let the game flow and naturally come to you. And I just felt Casey never let up. Once he started having some poor performances, he just became a V10 Lamborghini and just went off, just tried to do whatever he could and just forced the position. And, that's a maturity thing, I think. Maybe it's something to do with his development as well, but I found him extremely difficult to project as a result of that. Despite having such remarkable athletic gifts. So yeah, when we're looking at him from a development perspective, there's mental recalibration that has to occur where he has got to learn to amplify himself at the right times as opposed to all the time. Okay, and that's where Boruchev distinguishes himself, and that's why we have Boruchev ranked much higher. And if Casey can get there, Casey's one of those beautiful dark horse goalies where he will make his live terrible in every draft. He has top 5 talent all day. It's just the mental inconsistency of this goalie were on display full season. They never let up, and it gave us a lot of pause. And then, admittedly, the draft was so deep by the end of the season that is kind of easier to continue to drop him. But let's put it this way: this is how good this goalie class is. He's the 10th ranked goalie in our class, and he's that talent. He's a ridiculous talent. To have him at 10, it really speaks to just the depth of this class. There's so many good goalies in this class.
Yeah, and he didn't have a good season. So imagine if he had a good season.
Changes a lot of things for us. Yeah, it wouldn't be 10th on our list if he had a good season. That's for sure.
Okay, we got 5 more goalies left here on the list. We're gonna go maybe a bit more quickly on them than the top 10. So we'll start with 11 with our first goalie from Finland, Juuso Aineisto from Jokerit. So Brad, maybe your quick thoughts about Aineisto.
Well, he's the first goalie that's really mattered and that will be drafted from U18 Sarju since leaving Meriläinen. So Meriläinen, very close to making it here. We'll see if he can bounce back from what was a really, really poor season this year in Ottawa. But very different goalies. And what's interesting is, unlike Meriläinen, who stayed in U18 Sarju the entire season, Aineisto managed to split his season. And that gives us a lot more confidence in our assessment, because U18 Sarju is a totally different level of pain when it comes to trying to scout the position. So Aineisto, 6'4", very, very reactive, reflexive, athletically gifted goalie. Not as athletically gifted as the top end, but it comes into the next tier range there. A bit unconventional and unorthodox with the save selection. Actually, admittedly, reminds me a little bit of Brendan Bussey in that way, where I'm sure some of you watching this watched the Cup final. Brendan Bussey has a tendency to use his up-down position constantly and to a fault. And now it works for Bussey. Because he's 6'4" and a freak of nature. And Aineisto, not as freakish as Bussey, but still 6'4" and a good athletic base. So it makes sense why he likes to go to an up-down as much as he does. The other factors is that he is actually a pretty intelligent goalie, but not a good tracker. So Hrenik, really smart, decent tracker, This goalie, pretty smart, bad tracker. And that's where one of the defining traits and reasons why we have Hrenek above an S2. We did have an S2 up in the C+ range for a bit there, Jerome, to give everyone an idea here. Like, this is a pretty tightly, again, pancake stack type of list where neck and neck evaluations right across the board. He is susceptible on his high glove. High glove is where he has some difficulties, just like Trable and some other goalies here, where the glove can be susceptible. So that has to be cleaned up. And there's an inconsistency with his performance range. Some games he looks fantastic. Other games he's just getting melted because his technique is behind. It comes back to the Gordon Ramsay quote about how everything's too raw, right? This kid's very raw. So it just requires further projection. And if you take that projection into consideration, though, he still certainly looks like he has a foundation that you can mold. Like, he could certainly be a backup one day. And so that's important. But we're talking the 11th ranked goalie, and I legitimately believe he could be a backup. It's not just he's there on a list to just show everybody other goalies. He might be able to play if things go right with his technical development.
Okay, let's move on to number 12. We go back to Russia with Vladimir Prokurin. Brad, what's your take on this Russian goalie?
Yeah. So Vladimir Prokurin, very, very similar to Carter Casey in some ways. So hyper athlete. Now, there are some distinguishing factors. They're very similarly sized too. It's like hyper athlete, 6'1", similarly sized, some very, very impressive reflexes. Rate of extension is there all day. They can do full split lateral transfers and exaggerate the posture and do crazy things. Kicking reflexes are fantastic. Glove hand is good. Everything's there when you talk about the athletic component. Also very competitive, very good skater. His skating base actually is, like, in some regards, it's very, very impressive. Like, his ability to transfer from a seated RVH position into a standing set stance on the opposite side of his net at the top of the blue paint, top of the class. His transfer rates are top of the class, like almost Yaroslav Askarov, but he's 6'1" instead of 6'4". So that's one of the defining features of him. Now, where he really separated himself from Casey is that Casey had a bad season. This kid was unbelievable on a bad team in the Silver Division. So I think he had 41 starts. He was pulled 5 times in those 41 starts, and his team was overwhelmed basically every game. So that really tells you just how dialed in this kid was. Like, what he could operate in, he did. There were very few down performances from him. And admittedly, that was one thing with him for me where it's like, oh, I might get this one wrong. He might end up developing past what I think here and should maybe have him a bit higher. Now, the reason he's behind Casey, despite having a better season, the reason we don't have him as a top 10 goalie in this class is because of his overreactivity for the game. Now, unlike Casey, who was on a pretty good team in the dub, where he doesn't have as many excuses for the overamplification, this goalie does. Prokurin was on a bad defensive team, and he was getting overwhelmed, and that means he had to be super reactive because there are so many high-danger chances coming against him. It's a really hard for a goalie to breathe, and they're just constantly having to battle through everything. That's what I found. Now, when you're talking about what really can define a goalie long-term, it really is the release point reads. What you're looking for with release point reads is basically a one-on-one situation where the goalie's picking up as much intel as possible based off of the posture of the opposing forward that the opposing player that they're trying to assess. So, for instance, they're looking at obviously they're looking at the puck, but in their periphery, they're looking at the hip line, they're looking at the shoulder posture, they're looking at the loaded position of the player. They're looking at if the stick position is a neutral, open, or closed position. These are the defining features of Connor Hellebuyck. That is what Connor Hellebuyck is, one of the best goalie in the world at reading a release point of an individual shooter. Prokurin was the worst goalie out of any goalie that we have evaluated in our top 12 at this. That is why he is behind Casey and every other goalie. Now, when you factor in he's in the Silver Division, it makes that point even more amplified because not the Gold Division. So the quality of competition wasn't there. The skill level wasn't as high. Right? So it would be very different if I had to factor that in for him if he was in the Gold Division. So that's the primary reason. But admittedly, if you pulled him out of the Silver Division and you get him a goaltending coach who can get him to relax a bit, you might really get something still. He legitimately has backup potential. And again, this draft's really deep. You're talking 12th, actual backup potential.
Yeah. All right. At number 13, we go back to the WHL and another goalie from Czechia, Tobias Tverznik. Brad, what's your take on this goalie from another goalie from Czechia here?
Well, one thing I should have mentioned on our Shulak that I didn't was he was an overager. So we have two overagers on our list. Our Shulak was the first out of Czechia. This is the second out of Czechia. And like our Shulak, both played in Czechia U20, didn't get drafted, came over to the dub. And then, I think he was at least nominated for goaltender of the year, or he might have won it. I can't remember, but he was certainly nominated for it. And there's a reason for that. It's because he played really, really well. In his -1, admittedly, when I watched him in Sparta, I went back. I didn't watch him in his initial draft season. I didn't know who he was, which is weird because usually with Sparta, I always make sure. Sparta is a pretty good system in Czechia. I didn't do it last season for some reason, but I did go back and watch his -1 this season because I was like, would this be easy to tell? Was this an easy situation to read? And the answer is no. I did not have much time for him when I watched him in his -1. So my point in saying that is his growth rate and technical ability has skyrocketed. Basically, Wenatchee did an incredible job with him. In terms of getting him to modify his technique and play the position in a more modern style. Very good athlete. Not one of the top athletes in his class, but certainly for a 6'4" kid can transfer well, has natural athleticism. He's very unique in terms of how he operates. So he looks to cheat constantly. But what I mean by cheating is not completely setting on low percentage shots and giving himself more access to his edge work when he needs to remain on a flat angle for a potential lateral setup. So a lot of the modern day is that now. It's all about how goalies cheat and stay minutely off angle where it's subtle, but it's still there. And in his case, he does it to a fault, though. Like, for instance, a goalie we're about to talk about, Jérôme, that you know well, Jan Laris. Jan Laris is very good at using his edge work to slightly cheat, but then use his cheating in a way that creates trap saves. What I mean by a trap save is basically Dominic Hasek 101, where they're purposely allowing space in the net so that a shooter can see that space and then tries to draw and direct the shot into that space. That is one of Laris's gifts. But with Tverznik, I think it's to a fault because he defaults to it regardless of the context of the play. You're looking for goalies to contextualize what they're doing. That's where Tverznik has some difficulty. He also doesn't have the best tracking ability at this stage, and he's a bit older, and I'll be honest, Jérôme, you know this with every player you watch, like there's certain players you just feel comfortable with immediately. And it's like, oh yeah, we know what this is, like Ivar Stenberg, watching him in the SHL together. And it's like, oh, what are we talking about? We know he's going to be super high now back in November. And then there's players that take way longer for us to get on board with. For me, Tverznik fell in that camp where I'm like, I like him, but I'm still pretty uncomfortable with him. So that's one of the reasons is that my own bias, I'm a bit uncomfortable with him still. But he again is actually viable as a backup, I think, if things go correct with his development, which again, we're 13 talking about that. This draft's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ridiculous depth.
All right. 14, another goalie from Czechia, Jan Laris, who played in Drummondville in a queue. Lots of debate between him and Lascelles during the season, but looking at our rankings, not exactly
no debate for us.
Yeah.
No debate
take on Jan Laris?
Well, my take is that some NHL staff are going to think we're nuts. Some staff are going to have Laris above Lascelles for sure. Maybe more than I'd say 60-70% would actually favor Laris to Lascelles. The reason we're the opposite is in head-to-head matchups, it wasn't even debatable. Lascelles beat Laris down. But the main factor here is that Laris is a blocking style goalie who's technically ahead of most of the other goalies in his class, who has very good edge work, who's very good at staying in his net, very good crease containment, poised, calculated, efficient, okay? Those are all very good traits to have. Reminds me a ton of a bigger Eric Comrie. I don't like Eric Comrie. I've never liked Eric Comrie. It's one of the reasons I have bias towards this kid. Eric Comrie, if it wasn't for the Jets, I don't think he's in the NHL today, to be honest with you. Even though admittedly he had two pretty good backup seasons there that, I'll give him his flowers. But Laris is basically a bigger version of that to me. And we're talking about backups, and I really think Tversnik and Casey and Proskurin and Nestor are just a bit more interesting for me. One of the defining reasons we have him much lower than basically most NHL team lists would, and the reason that we have him in the C range, where I expect him to get drafted higher than our range for him for sure, is that when I peel back the layers, I watch full games of him in the queue, and I'm just watching him off puck, off puck, off puck. Not as smart as I was hoping. He's not dumb. He's still an intelligent goalie. But when I'm talking about a very technical, efficient blocking, like true blocking style, we're talking very, very average extension rates, below average rate of recovery, internal hip rotation is under, ability to seal through the ice with his groin dexterity is bad, like opens holes when he's laterally transferring. His 5-hole mechanics aren't there. Like tons of growth rate that needs to be factored in here with his physical projection. I want that goalie to be Patrice Plumman's Sam Hrenick levels of intelligence. He's not. I never saw that in the Q. And then, again, this is not the dub or the O. This is the Q. So I really want him to be ahead of the play. It's got to be Lassell levels. If it's not Lassell levels, good luck. And yes, he's 6'3", and Lascell's small. But it's for me, it needs to have the Plumman's sense. It's just not there. That would be the – now, again, I'm human just like everybody. I make mistakes. If things go right, could I be wrong and he'd be a backup one day? Absolutely. I'd be wrong on this kid.
Yeah, and I'll add this. He's a bit quiet, and like when we compare to Lascelles, who has like so much, moxie, feels like Laris is a bit too quiet in that sometime. Just maybe the confidence is maybe it's not like he's not a extra confident kid, and it's showing a bit in his crease. Like to see a bit more panache from him in that, like a bit more moxie. So yeah. Okay. You want to have something on Laris, or we're moving on to our last ranked player?
Yeah, we'll move on to Brady.
Okay. Our last ranked player is Brady Noling from the U.S. national program. So Brad, why is he last on the list? And because he's been ranked pretty high by I believe Central as in pretty high.
Yeah, there's one where I hope I'm not wrong because it's real bad looking. If I'm wrong, it's real bad. So Brady Noling, I first of all, I know 15 for basically everybody behind the scenes. We're like, come on, 15? Not 15. We've had him as high as 10. And I just kept bumping him down because I was like, okay, listen, like he has, the foundation of this kid, 6'5", technically pretty advanced, improved skating base. He's much better skater than he was last season when I saw him limited viewings, but way, 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 way better technical skating ability. Phenomenal butterfly mechanics. I love his butterfly. 6'5" kid who can really present well, has a natural butterfly, natural ability to seal. Also competitive. This kid is willing to throw caution in the wind, do whatever it takes. Where a goalie like, let's go with Laris. Laris, there's times where Laris, again, he's not a great athlete and he knows it, but I still wish he would attempt sometimes to try a bit more on pucks he knows are very likely to go in. That's it. Like, not to take too much away from Laris, because there was a performance, Jerome, I know you saw this game where he let in 13 goals, but he didn't actually stop trying to compete. So I will give him that. That was one where I was like, I'm pretty impressed that kid stayed in that game and held. I have no idea what the coach was thinking, no idea what the coach was doing, but the fact that he held there was impressive. Now with Noling, more competitive, bigger, more athletically gifted, technically the technique's coming along. The problem with Brady Noling is everything. When you peel back the layers and open the hood and you see what's underneath there, the lateral processing rates aren't there. The understanding of what we talked about that was very important with Hellebuck and some of these, the release point reads aren't there. There's a lack of intuition in this goalie. And pound for pound, let in the worst goals we saw this year. Jerome, what in the world? There are some games. Now, don't get me wrong. When he's playing up to his ability and he's peaking, like the All-Star game there, you remember that the program versus the OHL, he was fantastic in that game. And there was a couple other performances where he was fantastic. And then he does absolutely look like an NHL goalie, but there are way too many games where he'd be playing relatively well, and then he would let in a low to mid-danger shot where you go, how in the heck does that go in? How, in what world is that a goal? It didn't happen once or twice. It was consistent, and it never let up. I know this sounds strange for a lot of you listening to this, but I went back for a lot of the pro goalies you see today, from Alex Nedeljkovic to Elvis Merzlikins to Vasilevsky and on, Saros and all of them. It is surprising how many low to mid danger goals those goalies let in their draft seasons correlate to what you see currently. And the same applies to goalies who let in way too many. Artur Silovs, Jerome, when I watched the MHL and Dynamo Riga's system, guess what he did? Let in some goals you just can't let in. What's he doing in Pittsburgh? Same thing. He can make a brilliant save. He has all the athleticism. Technically, he's refined himself, but he lets in goals you can't let in, and because that is not reliable. That is the distinguishing characteristic here. I cannot see how he will be reliable enough and consistent enough to be able to hold as a starter in any capacity. So then I have to weigh that relative to the other kids who I think they're certainly not as gifted in some areas as Nolan, but are ahead of him from a mental foundation. Now, again, 15th, admittedly, I sit here, you could easily slot him into the 11th seed with Ernesto, and I'd be completely comfortable with that. This is an incredibly condensed ranking. These kids, some of these kids are so close to me. So I still wanted to keep Nolan in the top 15 because admittedly, the kid seems like a great kid off the ice. I hope he outdoes my ranking of him. And admittedly, he's got a great foundation, and the team's going to draft him way higher than where we have him. And so I hope one day he plays. But yeah, it's just the nature of the beast. I just disagree with Central's placement of him because I don't think he reads the game well enough to make it. He is. I will say this though, regardless if people would disagree with me on my ranking, I promise you, if I talk to NHL scouts behind the scenes about this kid, most NHL development coaches would totally agree with me that this is a long-term goalie. This is not a situation. He might get drafted super high, so you're expecting him quicker. Not going to happen. This goalie needs a ton of time. You're talking the same amount of time that it will take Ruzicka to hit the show, straight up. That was one of the factors we tried to incorporate as well.
All right. Well, my goodness, we're
back. We never left, Jerome.
But we did this pretty quickly. I was expecting this to be a much longer show, based on.
Yeah, I don't want to drown everybody too just yet because we have so many podcasts we're doing. We're gonna bring a ton of content, and really, I want to make sure to leave some stuff in the book because for our fantastic customers who purchase, I want to make sure you get some unique access to how I break down the position that I'm not going to talk about in this podcast. But this is more like a generalized idea of what the goaltending is. If you all want a much more detailed look at the position, the book is the choice. That's the one to go to.
There's also more goalies in the book than in this video.
And, also closing thought, there were certain goalies again I wish I could get to. One that I've been harped on that I'm expecting to get drafted, that I'll mention his name here just in case anybody's like, oh, I heard that name. Sander Hansen Alstrom out of J18. Very raw goalie, some athletic qualities. I couldn't get back to him in time. Solovic, again, from the U18s, Czechia. I never got to see him in the league play down the stretch, so I couldn't write him. And there were several more. Vermarovsky as well. There are certain goalies I just couldn't get back to in time. So I'm sorry about that, but I tried to at least cover the top 18, 19 goalies I thought I could get real write-ups for and do an in-depth analysis on.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up our goalie episode. Hope you guys enjoy it. We're going to be back for more videos, so keep an eye on our YouTube channel. We're going to have like videos until draft day, basically. So
all day, every day.
Thanks for watching, guys, and see you soon.
Thanks for listening, everyone.